Obviously today, main focus is going to be around the current consultation from Welsh Government around business rates. So we're going to do a run through of that from OJ. We've then got a quick presentation from a business perspective. Somebody's going to be joining us at 10:30. And then we're just going to do a bit of work around the consultation. And then lastly, if we get a bit more time, then just a round table around Christmas, if we've got time at the end. So if I hand over to you, OJ, if that's okay for you to run us through what we're here for today.
Yeah, cool. Thanks a lot, Amy. So today, everybody, it's that fun topic of business rates, which I know you all really enjoy. So bear with me 1 second while I get my screen up. Right, I'm having a few technical issues. Can everybody see that okay? Has that worked?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, I can see it now.
Excellent. So we have a business consultation open with the Welsh Government, and this is important because business rates has been a problem for as long as I can remember in this industry. So to start off, why it's important in this particular context. Firstly, it's important to say that we have a cost of living crisis, and this cost of living crisis is a real challenge for a lot of our businesses because it comes on the back of 2 years of restrictions which have really hampered trade for those consumer facing industries. This cost of living crisis is so bad that the Office for Budget Responsibility now projects that living standards in the UK will fall by 7% for households over the next 2 years. This is the largest fall since records began. So that is quite a significant hit to disposable income. We expect that this will hit retail and hospitality sectors especially hard. And not only do we expect it to be a drag on Christmas trading this year, but also in future months as well. In response, the Welsh Government has launched a £116 million fund to support businesses through the relief on business rates. So the sectors retail, leisure and hospitality will get additional support over the next financial year. And this is a continuation of support that's already in place, although it is winding down following the pandemic. So businesses will be eligible for 50% off their liability for the next financial year, and that's capped at £110 per business. The scheme that is currently in place for all retail, hospitality and leisure businesses with properties with a rateable value of up to £500,000, they all currently receive 100% business rate relief, which is in place till the last day of March. So the new scheme, where it's 50% relief on rates, will kick in on the 1st of April next year. So there'll be a smooth transition between the two. And reading through the information on the Welsh Government website, this is important to note because ultimately the support from the 1st of April for businesses in Wales may change. So this support, it says on the Welsh Government website, is made possible through the consequential funding of Wales resulting from the Chancellor's budget on the 3rd of March. And it's similar for Northern Ireland and Scotland, basically, where there is money given for things like business support by the Chancellor. For England, the equivalent amount will be made available, depending on the size of the economy, for both Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. So the question is, following the recent autumn statement by the you see, I say Chancellor, it's the old Chancellor, he's not the Chancellor anymore, obviously. So excuse my mistake. So the new Chancellor, I don't know if I've added enough news in there. I can't remember what number Chancellor we're on, but the new Chancellor made a surprise announcement on business rates during the autumn statement last week. And that statement could influence what happens in terms of additional business support coming forward in Wales. So having said he's not going to produce a rabbit in the hat for this budget because it's going to be an austere budget. He then produced a rabbit out the hat on business rates. So business rate support is surprisingly being extended in England, which could open up the potential for the Welsh Government to do more through consequential funding. And what it looks like in England is a freezing of the multiplier. So the multiplier is effectively the tax rate, and that goes up year on year based on inflation. If it was to have the increase this year based on inflation, then it would be quite whopping, as inflation at the point it is measured was about 10.1%. Based on the consumer price index. So that is actually going to be frozen. And over the course of 5 years, businesses benefit from that because that's a saving year on year on year. So over the next 5 years, that will save businesses in England 9.3 billion. And it means an estimated 230,000 businesses, nearly 250,000 properties will get a 2.1 billion tax cut next year. And the UK government is also increasing the retail, hospitality and leisure relief scheme, very similar scheme in England to what takes place in Wales at the moment. The scheme in England is going to be increased from 50%. So in England, it's at a 50% rate, not the 100% rate relief, which is enjoyed in Wales, but it will go from 50% to 75% for the next financial year. And that is, again, capped up to £110,000 per business. There's also going to be support in there around transitional relief, which is really important, actually. So what happens is to help smooth out the changes in liability following a rates revaluation. What will happen is those businesses that get lower rates bills following a revaluation, those decreases in the rates they will have to pay are phased in slowly over the 5 years. And the reason why that's done is because that helps the government to then subsidise the cost of those businesses that face huge hikes in their rates bills, and those hikes will be phased in slowly over the course of that 5 years. So it helps to smooth out any major shocks in terms of changes in liability. What the UK government is promising to do is it will abolish the downward phasing. So if a business gets lower bills as a result of the revaluation taking place in England on the 1st of April next year, there will be no phasing, though they will be able to pay those lower bills straight away. And that is to protect, and the government will pay to protect the phasing in of those higher bills. So the higher bills will continue to be phased in slowly. So that's a cost the government will bear, the Treasury will bear. Now, this is the key question. It's on this bullet point, which I just want to pause for a moment. Why, we have to ask, would bills be going up for business rates, considering we are in an economic crisis, we've got cost of living challenges, challenges around energy, and we are coming out of COVID, which has surely hit property values? Why would rates be going up at all? And this is the problem with business rates and the way it works. Because you're all thinking what I'm thinking. Think of the challenges we've had recently. So business insolvencies at a high level across England and Wales, with voluntary liquidations taking place at the beginning of the year at a rate not really seen before. And think about some of the names we've lost from the high street recently, Debenhams and Arcadia, for example, and the types of vacancies we've had in terms of retail space and the mass change to residential in some parts as a result, because we just cannot fill that property anymore. Take the challenges around business rates as being a key driver for some of these failures, because it is entirely inflexible, and it is now seen as one of the big drags on investment for the high street. And the loss of the likes of Arcadia and Debenhams apparently have the Treasury nervous because of the hole it leaves in terms of the finances. it's not just the retail sector either that's really felt the force of COVID and high costs. Pubs, for example, at a record low. So we expect that they've dropped below the 40,000 mark for the first part of this year. And we expect things to get much worse next year with UK hospitality, saying that hospitality businesses in the UK face some serious pressures, and around a third of them could go bust or will be at serious danger of making some big losses next year. So that pressure will continue. And then it's not even just retail and hospitality, it's also the office sector as well. Consider the challenges we've had in terms of pressure on people to work from home and what that might do in terms of businesses' use of office space. Now, the problem is that business rates is a really inflexible tax. It just does not move with the time. So rental values across much of retail, leisure, hospitality, office, etc., have come under pressure, but it's still quite possible for the business rates paid for businesses using non-domestic property to actually go up, believe it or not. You compare that to corporation tax, where you pay the tax on the percentage of your profits, and if your profits go down, obviously you then pay less. If you make a loss, then you actually get a partial rebate based on profits you have paid previously. That doesn't happen with business rates. Business rates can be quite a challenge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and explain why before we pause, and we can go over to Nick Newman if he's able to join us yet. So business rates is paid by occupiers and owners of all property and infrastructure. It's actually called non-domestic rates because business rates probably isn't a fair reflection of what it does, because it is paid by public sector and not-profit organisations as well, anything which basically isn't domestic. It's not just property either, it includes transport, utilities, telecommunications, infrastructure for gas, electricity, water supply. It even includes advertising hoardings. If those advertising hoardings are used for commercial purposes and it's not a not-for-profit purpose, not-for-profit promotion, then you will be charged business rates on those as well. And the money collected, and this is important because when we talk about reforming business rates, we have to remember why we collect business rates. It pays for key local public services. The only exception here is national infrastructure, which tends to go to the national government. And rates liability is paid for properties, is usually based on the nominal rental value of a unit on the open market. And the only exception for that is licensed premises. In England and Wales, which use a system called fair and maintainable trade to ascertain their value. And then based on that value, whether it's fair maintainable trade or whether it's the rental value of the property, the government of the day will apply the tax rate, which then, if you like, identifies what the rate's liability will be. So we then have the revaluation. So over time, of course, the value of property will change depending on economic circumstances. And that change normally takes place historically over a 5-year cycle. It's important to note that England has now gone to every 3 years for a revaluation. And I think both Northern Ireland and Scotland also have aims, aspirations to move to a 3-year revaluation cycle as well. So what happens with the revaluation is you look at the new values and then you put in place new rates, liabilities to reflect the new economic circumstances. So basically speaking, if the rental value of a shop has gone up, then the rateable value will increase. But if the rental value of a shop has gone down, then the rateable value will go down. And ultimately you should, and I use should in inverted commas, be paying less tax. But unfortunately, it doesn't always work that way. Rateable value can go down and you can still end up paying more in business rates, which is why so many businesses over the years have kicked up a real stink about the tax and how it just doesn't reflect reality. So rateable value can go down, but that doesn't mean you pay less tax. Now, the reason why is this final thing I want to explain, which is revenue neutrality. The revenue neutrality is absolutely key to the whole system. You see, business rates was actually conceived in the 1980s under the Thatcher administration. And of course, in the 1980s, we did not have the internet. We did not have much of a digital economy. And so there weren't these external influences which can really have an impact on the commercial property market. Under the system, under this system of business rates, every UK nation operates a revenue neutral system. So ultimately, the amount made in any one nation has to be the same after the revaluation. I'm not sure how much it is in Scotland, but it's just over £1 billion. In Wales, it's about 560 million in Northern Ireland, and about 25 billion in England. So after every revaluation, the tax take has to be pretty much exactly the same as it was before. And that's where there's a challenge. So all the revaluation does is it spreads the liability differently through the businesses, through those using non-domestic property, but the overall tax take remains exactly the same. So here's an example. Let's do, and it's a bit of a rough and ready example of how it should work. Let's say rental values in North Wales have fallen by 10%, roughly on average. And in South Wales, we've had a good time in South Wales. Things have been fairly positive. Rental values have increased by 10%. At the end of a revaluation, what it will mean is, on average, bills in North Wales will go down by 10%, and the bills in South Wales will go up by 10%. And the amount of money collected by the Welsh Government should remain exactly the same. So that's how business rates calculation should work. But the problem starts under a revenue neutral system when you have trends or shocks that undermined huge amounts of non-domestic property. So we're not talking about individual circumstances, which might mean individual properties are doing well and some are doing poorly. What if you have a challenge that impacts everyone and you have a downward pressure on rental values everywhere? Then we have a problem, because this is what it actually looks like. So let's keep our 20% differential between North Wales and South Wales. So let's say in this scenario, North Wales properties are down in value by 30%. In South Wales, they're also down, but they're only down by 10%. So we got the 20% differential in there. Then the result of a revaluation means, despite a 30% fall in terms of value, because we've got to maintain revenue neutrality, bills in North Wales will only go down by 10%. They can only go down by 10%. So businesses will be scratching their head thinking, well, this fall isn't reflective of the fall I've seen in the value of my property. It's even worse for South Wales, because that 10% fall in the value of their property equates to actually a 10% increase in their bills. So that then becomes a massive financial challenge, because they're having to pay more in difficult economic circumstances. The amount of money collected remains the same. So that's where the main challenge is. That is the problem. Since the creation of business rates, we've not only had the massive growth of digital technology that has decimated the business model for commercial property, but we've also had a pandemic now, which has accelerated a lot of these challenges. So you think of everything from online shopping to what we're using now, Zoom, which can have a massive impact on everything from physical bricks and mortar retail to the use of office space. So clearly there's a challenge there, but the business rate system cannot reflect that challenge. It is a bit of a nightmare. So the result is we have perpetually high rates. Nearly all businesses relying on bricks and mortar will only ever see very small falls in business rates, and some might see increases despite the economic shock we've seen recently. Rates cannot respond to trends like online shopping or shocks like the pandemic. And it's why the whole system is held together at the moment by relief initiatives, relief schemes. that can keep businesses going. Because I think if businesses were exposed to 100% business rates liability throughout the pandemic and now throughout this cost of living crisis, there's no natural way in which they would be able to make the costs add up. That's a problem we have with this unresponsive tax. So it's a real challenge. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave it there and pause for questions, and just see if Nick hasn't joined, so I can continue with the start of the consultation until Nick joins us. But yeah, I just wanted to pause and say, any questions or comments or issues you want to talk about? You know, I know it's not an easy topic, and I know how complicated it is.
Stone silence.
I know, but it does need to be explained, because it's so fundamental to the way high streets work in the modern world. And it's not just, I can't think of many other issues that impact all of our members in a fairly significant way, whether it's the health and viability of our businesses on the high street, it's funding for our local authority members, it's funding for business improvement districts. So whatever it looks like, however it operates, it does matter. It absolutely matters. I don't know if it's worthwhile me asking you guys what your businesses think at the moment of the business rates they have to pay on the high street.
OJ, I got a question, if I may, please. I had to come back in, sorry, because I had to reconnect, so I might have missed some of it. Have you got any timelines at all of when we're expecting it to come over the bridge, or when's it going to be launched in the UK? Because it was announced last week, wasn't it? So have you got any sight on that or a steer on that?
So is this in terms of the additional reliefs coming in?
Yeah, and also when are they going to start doing the review process, etc.?
Okay, so just to give you what I think of the timelines, in terms of changes to business rates relief, which is scheduled to happen both in Wales and England. So in Wales, it's going to go down from 100% relief to 50% relief for retail, hospitality and leisure. That change will take place at the end of the financial year. In England, it's going from 50% rates relief up to 75% rates relief. Again, that is at the end of the financial year. So 31st of March to the 1st of April is when the change will happen. In terms of longer term reform, the Welsh Government in its consultation is looking to make the system operate a little bit better. It says it cannot do this work in time for the change of the financial year because some of it will need primary legislation. So some of the stuff the Welsh Government is proposing, if it does want to bring it forward, it says it will bring it forward in a local government finance review, in a local government finance bill towards the back end of next year. In terms of the fundamental reform it is looking at, that could be sort of years in the pipeline. And I think a lot of work would need to be done with Westminster to be able to bring in a new local tax system. Because even though business rates is now a devolved tax, there is still so much similarities, so much in terms of the process which is linked to the England system. For example, like the use of the Valuation Office Agency, the VOA, that calculates bills. It does that across England and Wales. They try to keep the cycles the same as well. So it's difficult to see if Wales can break away from business rates unless Westminster does the same first. But that's where I come back to the issue of sort of highlighting the views of the Labour Party. So the Labour Party has already agreed to scrap business rates if it comes into power. The way the polls are looking at the moment, that could be 2 years away before the Labour Party is in power. So I plan to meet a shadow minister and talk through those plans soon to see what's on the table. So it could be that ultimately that could be the thing that would allow the Welsh Government to then scrap business rates if that's what it wanted to do. And just to tell you as well, spoiler alert, the alternative tax it's looking at as opposed to business rates is a land value tax. So that is in the consultation. That's what it is considering.
We got a couple of questions in the chat. So the first one is from James saying, do you know if the small business rates relief scheme will remain with the same tiers that the COVID relief was on top of the relief scheme?
Yeah, so in terms of that one, James, as far as I know, that remains in place. There's nothing that's I've seen mentioned from the Welsh Government that says the small business rates relief scheme will no longer be in place. And I think that's a more temporary, more permanent thing as well. So even once all the COVID reliefs are gone, that should remain in place. However, in the consultation, the Welsh Government does say, it does ask, do we need to restructure the reliefs? Can the reliefs be done differently? So there is a question there as to whether we change the small business rates relief. I don't believe there'll be much appetite for making small businesses pay more, to be honest. So I wouldn't be too worried about that one. So I would expect that to stay.
Yeah, and then one other one from Helen, is the rate relief in England going up for hospitality and leisure from 50% to 75%, or other sectors as well? So are there other sectors that that's going up for?
Yeah, Helen, so the system is fairly similar for England and Wales, and that is that that relief, which was linked to COVID, because and this is that it was conceived at the beginning of the pandemic, and that is because of lockdown restrictions, the businesses hit most are consumer facing businesses. So the three sectors which get this relief are retail, hospitality and leisure. So they're the three sectors that will get it. So yeah, for England, that will go from 50% to 75% from the 1st of April.
I think somebody else has joined us now as well.
Amy, this is Nick. He's coming under my name. But
I know, I was two Adrians here.
There is only one Adrian Field, I assure you. The world doesn't need two. So yeah, Nick Newman. Do you want me to introduce him to you all?
Yes, please. Yeah.
All right. So Nick, thank you for joining us. Yeah, OJ asked me, just for everyone's benefit really, if we were aware of someone who's a leading light in the business community in Cardiff, to sort of share their experiences with regard to business rates. So Nick is one of the directors of For Cardiff. He's also been chair of the Licensees Forum in Cardiff for 23 years now, Nick?
23. Oh, wow.
So he knows his onions. And he also is manager of the Bluebell pub, which is part of the Creso chain of pubs, which I think is 5 in number now, Nick?
Yes, it's 5 for now.
At the moment, yeah. So Nick's been very supportive of For Cardiff, obviously as a director. We'd hope he would be. But he's very well versed in lobbying on behalf of the businesses, and has got a really good grasp on the challenges that are facing the licensee industry in particular.
Well, thank you, Adrian. And you said you were asked to find a leading light. You couldn't think of anybody, so ask me instead.
Thanks a lot, Nick. Thanks a lot for coming along. Do you want me to? You want to make a Q&A session? Should I ask you a few questions and then you can give us your very best answer?
By all means. I mean, yeah, I play it the way you like to. I mean, as Adrian knows, and always with these things, I try and canvass some specific views. I didn't get many, but the ones I got yesterday were pretty succinct and cutting. But yeah, you go ahead, OJ, and we'll play it by your script.
Yeah, fine. Well, thanks a lot for joining us. So firstly, what do you think is the overall view, both for yourself and the other businesses you canvassed about business rates and how it operates?
I always try and stay away from cliches with things like this, but it is quite difficult. And the overriding concern, I would say, is uncertainty. There's uncertainty around so many significant costs to our business. Of course, energy is well documented. You know, the rising cost of wages, and we all understand that, you know, that the government's living wage and minimum wage rises every year. It represents a huge cost when quite often, and it's probably been put the best way by Chris Gumbrill, who's the chief exec of Brewhouse Bar and Kitchen. He said, the cake's not getting bigger, but the slices are getting smaller. So uncertainty is the thing that came across the most from the businesses when it comes to rates, business rates specifically. What I think in Wales is slightly different to England in so much as there's a little bit more certainty. I just heard you saying, OJ, about the rates relief, but nevertheless, again, the overriding comments here are that we don't really get value for money. I mean, something that I witnessed myself personally, I'm very operational, I'm in the street every day, is that everybody is stretched absolutely to the limit, be that our staff, be it council staff, be it police and emergency service resources, everybody is stretched absolutely to the limit. And I think, you know, for that reason, if you want to go really broad and societal, it causes lots of stresses and strains. But for us specifically in licensed and hospitality businesses, you know, we just stay in there pitching and fighting every day for every transaction that we can make and every customer we can welcome through our doors. But it is increasingly difficult and it's increasingly uncertain.
Well, thanks for that. Another question for you. So just based on something you said, actually, so do you think the public services around you, such as, I don't know, things like policing, for example, do you think they're funded well enough, or do you think there's challenges in terms of some of the way public services are actually funded?
I mean, I suppose, never mind the 23 years of being chair of Cardiff Licensees Forum, I've got 40 years as a working manager, you know, in a busy city centre, vibrant Cardiff as it is. And so I can draw on my own experience of how the police used to be funded and resourced, and I can see that they're massively underfunded now. Of course, the challenges change and sometimes they increase, but it's, again, important to try and keep all these things in perspective. The nighttime economy in Cardiff is extremely well run, safely managed, you know, with some great initiatives from For Cardiff, for example, as well as all the work that we do as a collective of businesses. And I think any honest viewer of the situation would say, well, relatively speaking, things haven't changed. There's disorder now and again. There are instances of drunkenness and people that end up in A&E. But again, all of these services are coming under massive increased pressures. And one of my colleagues does put it pretty well in terms of hospitality is always quite an easy target. We're highly regulated, highly supervised. We're easy to pick on, and we are. And sometimes we're blamed for all the ills in society. Whereas actually, if you get under the numbers of these things, and organizations like Nighttime Economy Industry Association and UK Hospitality do some great work on this. 39 billion was the last figure I heard goes into the exchequer, into the treasury rather. You know, we're forever reinvesting our businesses. We're forever reinventing what it is. We're reinvigorating, you know, sadly, some high streets that are in decline. And yet, you know, around us, what we see is further and further stretching of resources, making it more difficult for everyone, really. And then reflecting, I think, you know, in terms of what we want to do in hospitality, the same as other retailers, we want to have a vibrant, fantastic looking city centre and further afield as well. But sometimes I think local authorities and local services struggle. And I think that is where bids come into it. Again, I've had comments from a couple of forum members who've said how important bids are, albeit, again, it's another significant cost.
Well, thanks a lot, Nick. That's really important, really useful. Another question for you. If there, actually, I'm going to leave that one second, but can you tell us a little bit about fair maintainable trade and how that process works in terms of a revaluation? Because it's not something I'm actually that familiar with.
That's a term I'm not familiar. Firm, what did you call it, OJ?
Fair maintainable trade, which I think is something some licensed premises use in terms of their revaluation, as opposed to the value of their property.
Well, again, I'm not very familiar with that term, but a recurring theme really from the businesses. And I know that, again, the organizations I referred to earlier talk about the disparity really between rateable value of hospitality businesses and what they actually pay versus, or the one versus turnover. And there's a massive sort of, well, yeah, disparity, sorry to repeat myself. And I know that's a concern for independent operators, so sometimes 1 and 2 man operations, up to, like I said, Chris Gumbrell, Brewhouse Kitchen and Bar and Kitchen, I think 23 venues. You know, Chris is somebody who speaks very, very well on this. And again, highlights a lot of it. Of course, a lot of these issues get buried under the mountain of general news, business news, hospitality news, you know, with other sort of leading matters. But I think this is, again, highly significant, the fact that these things are out of kilter one with the other, rateable value versus turnover.
Cool. And then one more question for you from me. If business rates was to change, what type of changes would you like to see?
Yeah, I think that they would have to be really commensurate one with the other, as we've just been saying. It's not right that one sector, i.e. hospitality, pays significantly more than the rateable value sort of warrants. And again, I suppose because it's partly, or it's mostly driven by local councils, maybe it doesn't get the headlines, maybe it doesn't get the focus. I am getting the sense that, you know, through conversations like this and what I read about going on in Welsh Government and also Westminster, you know, it is being raised more and more by MPs and others on behalf of businesses, and that's as it should be. It is about value for money, and it is about addressing the sorts of issues that that we as businesses, as households, are faced with day in, day out.
Nick, that's excellent. That's really useful. Does anybody else want to jump in with any questions or comments while Nick's with us?
I said it all.
You said it all. No, you absolutely smashed it. That's really useful. I think for me, one of the important things, and we can't forget this in this particular debate, is how important business rates is in terms of the local services it funds. Because Nick has identified, not only is it a challenge for the businesses, given everything that's going on, and like I said, business rates is not a flexible tax. So if a business is having a difficult time because of issues well outside of their control, there's almost no chance that they're going to be getting a lot of money off their business rates, because that's not how the tax works. But at the same time, we're struggling to fund local services, so bringing in less money isn't an option. That's one of the biggest challenges with business rates.
OJ, we've got a question that's come into the group. This is slightly off topic, but directed at Nick. Have you received complaints around the increase in the I think that's the sound licensing fees?
PPL and PRS is one of those background noise things that we live with forever. Hugely resented by bar and nightclub and restaurant operators, and yes, their rates are increasing. Of course, they were already grossly unfair, I don't mind saying, and they just whack it up on top, and well, they seem to have literally a license to print money. So yes, many complaints, but again, unfortunately, it's almost one of those background noise things.
I don't know if there's any others in the chat, OJ. So
Amy, can I come in?
Yeah, of course you can.
Yeah, Nick, I was just wondering, did CRASO as an organisation automatically appeal on their business rates bill, or industry wide? Is that still almost the norm for an appeal process to go and just sort of delay things? I know the last round there was sort of plans to try and tighten that up so that it wasn't as easy to perhaps appeal as it was in previous years. But I'm just wondering whether, from your point of view, whether that's something you've seen either from Crato or wider amongst licensees.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, it's the case. I mean, you know Craig, and you know that he's on all these things, and others like John Bassett, they're switched on to what it is that they can do and what the rules permit them to do. Others not so. So I suppose that's a mixed bag, Adrian. But yeah, that appeals process is important, and but very, very time consuming and lengthy as far as I understand it.
Okay, I think those are all the questions. OJ?
Cool. Oh, I think Owen's just put his hand up.
Oh, go on.
Sorry, yeah, last minute. I put in the chat, hopefully it's helpful for some people, but I kind of think the whole question about business rates is we've kind of been here slightly before, and Welsh Government did a review back in 2012, which I remember got a lot of publicity at the time, and it had a lot of people from the property sector involved in it. I don't remember the recommendations, but I'm sure a lot of them would still hold true. I mean, I'm not entirely convinced that government has got the appetite to really throw business rates as a system out and replace it with something entirely new. It's just too complicated, and parliamentary time and the like won't allow it. But if we are to keep a broken system, I think what would be most helpful is if there's some way of linking business rates to the way that local areas perform. So there's kind of like retention of business rates within local authorities. If there's, regeneration and growth that kind of benefits the businesses that are expected to pay that, I kind of think there's a better relationship between businesses and local government if that relationship was kind of incentivized, because as we know, business rates are collected by local government, but then they send it back to the central pot, and then they get their allocate back from government. So they don't actually have any incentive to kind of see growth from a financial point of view for business rates. That's not to say there's no incentive to see growth in their local areas. So I kind of just think that seems to me like a fairly straightforward thing to try to do in terms of improving a broken system, even if it's something for the interim, really. So just a thought along those lines. And just a hello to Nick. I haven't seen you for a while, Nick. Nice to see you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Owen. Yeah, I think, to be fair, every UK nation has done various reviews. The one in 2012, I have a feeling we might have been involved in. Russell, you'll have to remind me when it was we went to the Welsh Government. It wasn't a government committee, it was a parliamentary committee on business rates and fed back. I don't know if that was part of the same review, but that Owen is a good illustration of that, the fact that we all recognize the system is broken, but at the same time there's an acceptance that maybe it's just too complicated to actually change in a way. Now I think in terms of the Welsh Government's feeling of land value tax might be the way forward, that it's quite possible that could potentially happen, because the thing with a land value tax is I think most developed countries in the world operate a land value tax, so there's plenty of learnings out there. And the business rate system itself, because we're talking about valuing every single non-domestic property everywhere, that in itself is so bureaucratic and costly that actually the move to a land value tax might be the thing that makes quite a lot of sense, is my feeling anyway. Yeah, so Russell's confirming, yeah, we were involved in that. So I do remember speaking to a parliamentary committee in the lead up to the 2012 review.
We've got Emily Cottrell, there's hand up.
Hello. Yeah, I was actually going to ask OJ if there was, if ATCM does have a position on the local land value tax, which obviously you've just started sort of semi talking about, and then sort of specifically how that links to sort of the Welsh Government's tax policy framework, which is sort of mainly around sort of raising revenue as fairly as possible and being clear and stable and simple, which I mean, business rates is stable, but it's neither clear nor simple, and it's definitely not fair. So it's just, if there is a view from ATCM, if the local land value tax is a better option, or if there's a secret third option that sort of you would advocate for, just where the land lies with that. Sorry.
No, it's a really good question. It's a really good question. I think it's, for ATCM, it's probably a mix of land value tax, and then there is a third option. So the challenge we have, and big thanks to Nick, because I think he's underlined the challenge we have, is we're taking too much money in terms of land and buildings and infrastructure, and it's too much in the context of we've lost a lot of money to the digital economy, because ultimately the digital economy is now a thing. It's now an economic powerhouse, and I feel like the value from the digital economy isn't being captured tax-wise, and we continue to place it on property because it's difficult to move property. The tax avoidance is a difficult thing to achieve with your property. You can't hide your shop. You can't hide your shop. It's not going to happen. And the desire of governments to say property is stable, provides stable tax revenue, when you have a digital economy which is showing you that that's not the case anymore and is undermining the value of property, means I think you have a system which is no longer operating fairly anymore. I think the fairest thing, not necessarily the easiest thing, but the fairest thing is that there is some form of digital sales tax that sits alongside some form of land tax. So you're capturing value from both. But what that will then mean is those that rely on land or property, buildings, etc., they pay a little bit less, and those operating online pay a little bit more. And then what you do is you remove that distortion in terms of how the tax system is working on the high street. It becomes much easier then to invest in things like urban regeneration because the tax is going to be lower. But then you support the ability to be able to fund local public services because you've got this extra tax source, because you've broadened the tax pool, if you like. You've broadened the amount of people paying into the system, which is fair, because you can't tell me that a company like Amazon, for example, doesn't rely on roads, warehouses, and all the infrastructure they need in order to create a business which is successful. So they should be paying their fair share. It's at the moment, I've felt for years that actually high street businesses subsidize Amazon by paying tax on their behalf through the high amount of business rates that's paid. That would be the fairest way for me. So it would be a mix of land value tax and a digital tax. Does anybody disagree with that, by the way? Because I'm happy to be challenged on this. And when ATCM goes into bat on business rates, we'll need all everybody's values and to try and identify the best way forward.
I remember reading something somewhere about sort of the difficulties faced by digital sales tax in terms of like not understanding, because things are quite often now neither fully online or offline, and just sort of adopting sort of a general kind of flat sales tax all round approach. I don't know if you've got a view on that.
Yeah, possibly. So yeah, I think a lot of challenge for retailers was having to pay twice. So there's a lot of retailers now, because property has become so expensive and online has its efficiencies, so many retailers now have a multi-channel system. And what they absolutely don't want to do is, having pushed for years for business rates reform, I think they've given up because they just assume it's going to be too complicated. And now the last thing they want to see is a tax placed on their online activity if there's going to be no movement on business rates, because their fear is that they would be charged twice. So there was an idea that maybe what we can do is to get rid of business rates and just have a flat sales tax. So you just tax all sales. and you tax it at source as well. So even the likes of Amazon will be paying. The only problem with that, and it might not necessarily be a problem. No, it is a problem. I'm going to take that back. Is there's lots of non-domestic property out there in which there are no sales attached to it, but it is used for commercial purposes. You take factories and warehouses and offices, for example, they should be contributing to the tax system. But if there's no direct sales attached to that particular property, then all of a sudden they fall outside the system. So then this big black hole starts to emerge in terms of the tax take. And I think that's the problem with that particular tax. So that's why I advocate what you could do is you could have something like a flat sales tax on the one hand, and then a land value tax on the other hand. So you capture a bit of both the land and the actual sale, so you get that economic activity. And another thing to say as well, in terms of land value tax, the ways in which it differs from business rates, if I remember correctly, is that it's a tax on the land itself, not the actual property. So the tax moves from the occupier of the property to the actual landowner, who tends to accrue from the value of that land in which property is based on, but is never taxed on that land. And some of the benefits that has is all the challenges we've had with engagement with landowners over the years, because we can't identify who they are, they would disappear, because if they have to be taxed, we're going to have to be able to find them legally. So all of a sudden, there's a whole group of landowners that then become engaged and part of the system. But it does have challenges for things like funding for bids. We would need to make sure we take that into account from the very start of the process. Oh, Amy, I've just seen Adrian's comment come in.
Yeah, I'm just going to come in on that one. Yeah. So there's Adrian has asked, are there any good examples abroad of any system that's being held up as a fair and accepted?
I haven't looked at it for a while. So as far as I know, there's lots of places which operate a land value tax. So I think there will be lots of options to look at. In terms of the bit around capturing digital sales, I think this is a new challenge for most developed economies. So that's much more difficult, and certainly up to the point where I was working on this quite a lot while I was ATCM Public Policy Manager. We couldn't find any good examples of anything that had been implemented that would necessarily work in the UK. I do know they had a system in the States, but each state operates its own different system, and it didn't look like it worked necessarily well in a way that would be transferable to the UK. So on the digital sales bit, I'm not sure, question mark over that.
Okay, I think that's all the questions in the chat covered, and there's some people started to give us some apologies that they have to leave as well. So shall we say thank you to Nick for joining us. Really appreciate you joining us and giving us your thoughts. Is there anything else for Nick now, LJ, or can we let him?
I think we can let him leave. That's a great contribution.
Thanks, everybody.
Nick.
Thanks,
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Nick.
Okay, so back to you, OJ, to cover the consultation document then.
Yeah, so the consultation itself. So
yeah.
Just to confirm everyone, so ATCM has been asked to meet with the Welsh Government to discuss our feelings on this particular consultation. So what we'll do is both Amy and Carolyn can support us on that meeting, and that way we've got both public and private sector input into the meeting, which will help. So the Welsh Government, following has launched its consultation. Deadline is the 14th of December, and it follows various plans, strategies, etc., which leads it to look at how it makes makes life a little bit better and fairer through the reform of local taxes, primarily business rates and council tax. So little bit of a recap on business rates in Wales: generates over £1 billion to fund public services, and it contributes about 10% of the total cost for the funding of local public services, with education, social services, housing, police and fire service being at the top of the list of things it supports. And like I say, that's why Nick's comments were really important in terms of recognising the challenges on public service funding. Just cutting the tax or scrapping it all together is simply not an option, because that money is required to fund public services. So that is really important. And then what the Welsh Government also gives is a breakdown of the costs to each particular sector. So industrial, 590 million, retail is 680 million, which is the most here. Offices 260 million, and then it's quite a big group in others, 890 million, which is a shame, because I assume sectors like hospitality and leisure would also be in that bracket. So it'd be nice to have a breakdown of what they contribute, but certainly on this breakdown, it's retail, which also happens to be the sector most influenced by the digital economy, is the sector which contributes the most in terms of rates, which is why I say there's a lot of distortion in the market as a result. But the Welsh Government does admit that business rates is a reliable source of income, but that it has its limitations, and it was never designed specifically to meet the needs of Wales. And so this consultation is needed to see, prior to any major reform, just how it can make the system work a little bit better. Long term, it will consider the land value tax as wholesale replacement for business rates, but in the short term, how do we make the system work better? So like I've said before, these changes will not be implemented in time for the new financial year. Any changes as a result of this consultation will need primary legislation, and they will be introduced in the form of a local government finance bill published towards the end of 2023. So here are the questions I want to ask everyone to get your thoughts. Firstly, we currently have a 5-year cycle for revaluations. And like I've said, much of the UK aspires to a 3-year revaluation cycle. 3 years is already in place in England. So should Wales move from the 5-year cycle to 3 years for the revaluation? Should it be even shorter than 3 years? And just to give you a bit of info that sits behind this. So like I say, England's already moved to a 3-year revaluation cycle. The revaluation is a really bureaucratic process, because it's a case of valuing each individual non-domestic property, which is a nightmare. It takes 2 years to complete the process. So what that means is, during a 5-year cycle, by the end of that 5 years, it means that the value, the rates being paid by each property by that time will be 7 years out of date, because you set the date for when you're going to value the property. It then takes 2 years for that valuation to finish and for those new rates to then come in, and then another 5 years before a new revaluation happens. So that's usually looking at 7 years out of date. So that's question one. How should we structure the reliefs is question two. So currently we have small business rates relief and empty property rates relief, high street rates relief, non-profit rates relief, the retail, hospitality and leisure rates relief, and other forms of rates relief. So how do we structure rates relief? Do we want to set a lower tax for businesses based on their size, sector or geographic location? So Welsh Government's not just thinking about rates relief, but do we just charge some types of businesses less? One thing Wales doesn't have, which other nations have, is a specific tax rate for smaller businesses. So smaller businesses will pay a lower tax rate. Wales doesn't have that differentiation, if I remember correctly. Is that something we would like to introduce? And then I don't think we talked about the land value tax already. So it's really those first three questions, which is, do we want to shorten the time of the revaluation? How do we restructure rate reliefs? And do we want any specific types of businesses, maybe in a specific place or of a specific size, or in a specific sector? Do we want to set them a lower tax rate? So they're the three questions. So I want to open it up to everyone.
Okay, we got Carolyn. Do you want to come in first?
Yeah, OJ, you mentioned about the 3-year has been implemented in England. Do you have any data about how successful that's been or how that's been received by businesses, just so we can have a little bit more of an informed opinion?
OJ, you're on mute, sorry.
Sorry, Carolyn, I think that's a really good point. The answer is no, because the 1st of April is the first time the 3-year revaluation will kick into place. So I was thinking, actually, one of the things we probably should be saying to the Welsh Government is, from the 1st of April, England will be going through the 3-year revaluation cycle. On this bit, should the Welsh Government just be sitting back for a little bit and seeing how that operates in England before it's introduced in Wales? Because the revaluation process is so bureaucratic, there's a reason why it has to be 5 years, and actually shortening it is really difficult. And ultimately, like I say, because of the revenue neutrality that sits behind the system, businesses don't necessarily benefit from the revaluation anyway, because it's just shifting the costs around between businesses in physical property. So they don't always necessarily benefit from a revaluation. So is it better for the Welsh Government to wait to see how it operates in England before we take the step of introducing what is a really bureaucratic process once every 3 years rather than once every 5 years? But it's the right comment, I have to say.
Yeah, and I suppose with that as well, it links to the reform as well, doesn't it? Could the reform quicken that process, and then essentially that 3 years being a less bureaucratic process? Is it that there is real benefit then from them being 3 years rather than the 5? So yeah, I think that's a really valid point, that maybe Welsh Government do need to take stock before they go down that road, but we'll obviously raise that with them. Kieran, I've got you next.
Yeah, my view is exactly the same. Having worked in business rates, and the last reval that was intended on 2015 got pushed back to 2017. I've worked really closely with the Valuation Office. They're so under-resourced already. How will they cope with this added burden of trying to do a reval every 3 years? Really, in conjunction with looking at these measures, what are they going to do to put additional resources into there? Because without that, they wouldn't cope with any further reval, in my opinion.
Is a fair point, and I think I agree that from what I hear both from across England and Wales with the VOA, is they are struggling with the amount of resource it takes to do a revaluation. Like, even the complaints process has just fallen down because they're not able to process the complaints in time. There are some businesses feeling like they've been overcharged on rates who have put in a complaint, some have gone out of business sort of long before their complaint even gets listened to by the VOA. That's how long it's taken. It's taken years for them to get through it. So I'm not sure practically how it works. And I do think one of the challenges is, because so few people understand the role revenue neutrality plays in business rates and how it means businesses never really feel the benefit of a revaluation usually. There's a lot of businesses that may be really upset if the revaluation continues to be once every 5 years. There's a belief that the quicker the revaluations happen, the fairer it is for everyone, without understanding that that's not necessarily how the system works. So I do think there would need to be lots of work and engagement done with businesses to say you don't feel, as long as we've got the system we've got, you don't necessarily feel the benefit of a reevaluation, which is why the reliefs need to stay in place currently. And the revaluation, for example, happening in England, the revaluation happening in England on the 1st of April, still needs reliefs to be accompanied with it, because there's not going to be that support for businesses at the end of the revaluation. So that's something we'd need to overcome.
And I think just to touching on that point there around if it could be, it could make it quite volatile, say volatile, that's probably not the right word, but it could make it quite swapping and changing every 3 years, whereas 5 years does give a little bit more certainty around what you're paying. You may not like it, but you've got more certainty in your business, whereas every 3 years you could be going up and down in terms of payments just because of this, the neutrality aspect of it. So yeah, I think, to me, I think it can't just be that frequency change. It's got to be a more fundamental change, I think, in terms of that overall assessment. Emily, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, thanks. I totally understand with and agree with what you're saying about sort of looking at how it goes in England with the change to the 3-year cycle. But I would just say that in terms of the practical reality of having that conversation, you will really, really antagonise the Welsh Government policy people if you talk to them about look at what's happening in England. I think specifically with sort of Welsh Government's relatively new taxation powers, it's a big sort of like flex of the devolution muscles, and they want to be like, we don't care what's happening in England. England should look at what we're doing. Just it's a careful line to walk. I absolutely agree with the point you're making. It's just making sure it's delivered in the most sort of productive way.
Yeah, and I think that is a fair point. I think it's the powers are there, so they want to use them, is probably, and it's probably not wanting to wait. But I think, we've got to give that argument in the right way. I think you're right that we haven't seen yet in other nations what that impact has had, and we don't want to go down another road that sort of causes more issues for businesses. And I think it maybe needs to approach that way rather than let's wait and see what England to do it. I think we've just got to be measured in how we pitch that, probably.
It's a really good point, Emily. I mean, you pitch it the wrong way could absolutely antagonize people. A way to pitch it is maybe to say, I don't just do it because England's doing it. Let's just there could be a way to
reverse psychology, as they
reverse
say.
psychology. Don't do what England's doing. No, you're crazy. And also I need to check on the Scottish situation as well. So if Scotland has gone down the line, I can't remember whether they have or not yet. I know it was recommended that they do, but if Scotland's gone down the line of 3-year reevaluations, then it might make more sense to use Scotland as an example. To see how it's working up there, because it might be that that's more palatable for Welsh policymakers in England.
Yeah, and I think there's a sort of an even further argument than that to go, well, is it that that step isn't far enough anyway? Maybe as policymakers you should be looking at that more fundamental change, and let's be the first to do that. It's not going to be an easy one to achieve, but maybe that is. Use those powers for that type of benefit, but obviously there's the wider argument, because it is still so interconnected. I think is the issue there, isn't it? It's so between them all linked. So yeah, there's only so much that can be done, I suppose.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, so that was question 1, OJ, wasn't there, that one?
Yeah, it was. So the next one was reliefs. What do we think about reliefs? We obviously have the temporary ones with COVID and cost of living, which are focused on retail, hospitality and leisure. But the permanent ones, which will probably be more focused on, is small business rate relief. I think it's the charity relief, the not-for-profit relief, are the two main ones. And then I think there's the empty property rate relief as well. Do we keep them? Do we want to scrap them? Do we want to add new ones? it's a completely open question.
I'm not going to. Oh, go on. I'm not necessarily going to comment on the sort of the others, but I think the empty property one is always an issue, I think, for people, because if they're absentee landlords as well, it just becomes quite a significant issue in some of our towns. But I know somebody wanted to come in there. I don't know who that was. Sorry, do you want to come in?
I think someone's got their hand.
Yeah, Kieran, do you want to come in then?
I think without small business rate relief, that we just find our properties decimated, to be honest. I think that is a lifeline. Predominantly, lots of our town centre businesses fall within that threshold of under 12,000. I think there could be a potential. I believe that England's threshold is 16,000. To increase that might be an option to have, take that level up. The discretionary relief, I definitely would keep that. We've got the mandatory 80% relief for charities anyway. Is a pot of money then at the authority's discretion of whether they give the 20% or not. Charity shops are always a lifeline to a landlord that's got rent rates to pay. Putting the charity in there, it used to be a bugbear of mine, but in the current climate, a charity shop can provide services that are needed now by people. They're getting things at a reduced price. My view is that the reliefs help buffer a system that is unfair. So without it, you really are hitting hard on people. So definitely the small business rate, the empties are 3 months for void for retail and 6 months for industrial. Maybe the 3 month void is something to be looked at, because I pick up Amy's point is probably more around the administration and the liquidation that draws these delays with getting these properties filled. But for me, the reliefs could be more generous. I know we've done a lot with COVID, protecting these properties. And I think really that to change them, in my opinion, and get rid of them, would just end up seeing businesses leave the properties.
Cool, that's useful. That's useful. I mean, my gut feeling is nobody wants to see small business rate relief go anywhere. And it's, yeah, I think it's that simple, and I've got no problem with that. I think the industry lobbied hard for years to try and take as many small businesses out the tax system as possible. So I don't see any of us arguing that relief needs to leave. I mean, would it be fair to say, would everybody agree with, so just to stick with revenue neutrality, if we said be a bit more generous with small business rates relief, but fund that through possibly reducing empty property rate relief? Would people be okay with that message? Is there anybody that would disagree? No, I think.
Oh, call the silence there.
Well, this is a slightly controversial.
It's scary as the wilderness.
I'm going to be in danger of falling foul of my friends at the British Property Federation, but if we've got a challenge with absentee landlords, I'm happy to consider it. And Emily makes a really good point. She says the consultation, I hadn't actually picked up on this figure. So the consultation document says at the moment, 50% of hereditaments get some sort of relief, which in itself is proof that the system is broken, which yeah, you can't really argue with.
Kieran, do you want to come back in there?
Yeah, one of the reliefs that kind of needs looking at, in my opinion, is the empty charity, where if it's next in use for charitable purposes, they can have 100% relief. Now, that to me is a little bit of a loophole, because they just say, yes, we are going to use it for charitable purposes next time. I don't know whether any of you have come across this situation, but so you've got there's no cap, I believe, on the rateable values. You could have these large industrial units, large warehouses, that the landlord says, well, the next time I rent it, I will be renting it for charitable purposes, and then they're exempt. So that's one certainly to look at, in my opinion.
In fairness, now what I've done is I'm only sort of picking out the key questions from the consultation and not boring you with all the sort of technical detail and all the other questions in there. I think, and it might actually be under the section of avoidance, where the consultation actually deals with that very issue, and I think the Welsh Government is of the mind to do something. So I'm happy to respond to that particular point if you think it's a problem. I think the Welsh Government has already identified it's a problem and has said so in the consultation document, so that there might be a proposal in there. I'm not sure it's dealt with under the, I can't remember, I'm not sure it's dealt with under the relief section, but is dealt with under the tax avoidance question.
Owen, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, just it's on this empty property relief. I mean, the one thing that I think is another angle on that is rate relief on empty listed buildings, because I think, again, for the same reasons that it's in a lot of historic town centres, old buildings, listed buildings can be, you know, they don't have to be kind of architecturally brilliant examples. They can be quite mundane properties in town centres that basically landlords can sit on for decades without having to do anything, because there's no penalty from having to pay business rates to get occupation in them. So I've come across it several times recently in terms of our town work, that you've got some wonderful buildings to work with in town centres, but there's no motivation for landlords to do anything, or the owners to do anything with it. So this whole thing around empty property relief, I think, is kind of just a way, just it's kind of used by owners to kind of just sit on properties too often. So it does need to have to be looked at, I think.
Okay, thank you. Is that, I think we've covered that one then, OJ. And the last one then was it around restructuring? No.
The last one was setting the tax rate. So
yes,
we want to set a lower tax rate, or so the Welsh Government is looking at sort of 3 different criteria. There's a lower tax rate based on size, aka rateable value, which is done in England and Scotland, and I think Northern Ireland as well, where small businesses or small properties pay a lower tax rate, which is subsidised by larger businesses in larger properties. So there's that. Do we want to set a lower tax rate by sector? So maybe it's because retail contributes so much to the tax pot, for example, but is highly disrupted by an online economy. Do we ask retail to pay a lower tax rate? Or maybe it's geographic location. So maybe there's a cluster of businesses in a particular town somewhere that we want to say these businesses should be paying less in terms of their tax rate. So that's the question.
I mean, in principle, everybody would probably want that for some parts of their areas, but I think if we then go back to the original point around the neutrality, well, there's going to be some, if you want to do that in one area, then you've got to compensate in another way potentially. So it's a really difficult one to support when you know you could be putting other people at detriment.
It is, and that's exactly the way it has to work. If one particular sector, for example, gets a lower tax rate, then everybody else has to pay a little bit more to top up the pot. It might be so the Welsh Government is keen on making sure things are fairer and greener and looking at the issue of sustainability, and we know that supporting existing urban centres is key to the sustainability regime. You know, you might be able to put forward a plausible argument where you say maybe businesses in town centres and city centres should pay a little bit less in terms of the tax rate to incentivize inward investment, which then allows us to rely on other benefits like active travel and public transport rather than encouraging out of town. So that would then actually align with broader Welsh Government objectives. So that's a possibility, but I'll open it up to the group.
Yeah, Emily?
Yeah, I was going to say basically exactly what OJ just said. So in advance of the 2021 Senedd elections, for Cardiff published what we called a recovery manifesto for cities and high streets. And one of the things in that was about sort of incentivising sort of town and city centre development and de-incentivising sort of retail parks and business parks, and saying exactly what OJ's just said about the other benefits, like dense multifunctional spaces as opposed to sort of car dependent business parks. And I think sort of incentivising in that way, in a Wales context, sort of links quite nicely with the sort of the wellbeing goals as well. So there's sort of policy angles around the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act that I think can be brought into this conversation.
And just to add to the argument as well, sorry Russell, I'll let you in a second, but remember these businesses are paying for the infrastructure they use, the infrastructure they rely on, and when they are clustered together in an urban centre, their efficiency is much better because they're all relying on the same roads, water system, grid system, etc. However, they seem to be paying a lot more in rates in comparison to less efficient businesses and property which are out of town, which don't benefit from that the efficiency of economy. So I do think there's an argument there. The more I think about it, I do think there's an argument there for that particular ask.
Russell, do you want to come in there as well?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I'm going to have to shoot it off in a second. So I'm not sure if this is relevant at all, OJ, or to the group, but in our area, we have a ground rent, which is charged the landlords on empty properties, which can be quite a lot because the local authority is the freehold owner. Doesn't happen so much in Cardiff, from my understanding, or other cities, but maybe that's something that can be looked at from a Welsh Government point of view, because that is stopping the landlord who's getting in a quick tenant rather than having a more sustainable tenant. So they're flipping them quicker, which is then causing more empty units. So it is relevant to think what we're talking about. But obviously the council are going to be under their own pressures financially. So I think that would be a Welsh Government policy to support them in trying to do something, not just our councils, but other councils and freeholders as well. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Russell. Yeah, fair point. And it might actually contradict our point on empty property rate relief as well. So it is something we're going to have to think about carefully, because that is the argument against taking away empty property rate relief, is ultimately you force property owners into making the sort of quick and easy decision who they bring in as a tenant, which don't always have the long-term benefits which we would like. But obviously we have to balance that with those who just intend to sit on the property and can do so to property rate relief. So it's about finding the balance.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Can't see any more hands now, OJ.
Guys, thank you very much. That's really useful. Lots of really important points. I think we've got a lot to take back to the Welsh Government to have a discussion on. And yeah, immensely helpful, immensely helpful.
Just conscious of time, I think we are due now to have been wrapping up. So we did talk about possibly doing something around Christmas trade, I think, OJ, wasn't it? Just having a quick discussion about what people's plans were. I don't know if you still want to do that, or if people have got to shoot off. Happy to obviously end there if that's the preference.
Yeah, good question. If people need to shoot off, I think that's fine. I think what we can do, Amy, is first session of the new year, we can come together to talk about what Christmas performance was like.
Yeah, let's do it that way then, I think.
We'll do it that way. And just to let everybody know as well, Visa have their Let's Celebrate Towns competition open. up to 20k available for those with good projects they want to enter. So please do just put in visa Let's Celebrate Towns. It should come up in Google. So I encourage you all to go for it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. And obviously we'll keep you updated following the Welsh Government discussion as well, and update you all in the new year. Have a nice Christmas, everyone.
And
if we don't speak to you all before.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you very much,
Thanks
everyone.
all. Merry Christmas.
Thanks all. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Thanks, OG.
Bye.